Hey everybody, it's Korie with CVMA, and today we're here to talk about the cat stance. So we're going to start right away by talking about the structure of a cat stance. A cat stance is a 90-10 stance, which means that 90% of the weight is on our back leg and only 10% of our weight goes on our front leg. So we're going to step out into the stance. It's going to look a lot like the back stance in terms of how we step out. So the first thing we're going to do is if we're going to step out with our left leg, we're going to take our right leg and we're going to turn it 45 degrees. So not 90. We're going to go 45. Now, I have to say, cat stance has a lot of different ways it's done, and it varies from art to art. A lot of times, cat stance is either done 90 degrees or 45. So for our school, we do 45. It makes more sense from a combat standpoint. It gives you a little more structure. This stance isn't designed to take a lot of force. It's more of a transit stance. If you're moving from one stance to another, or you're fading back for an attack, that's where this stance is normally used, but it's not a stance that's meant to take a lot of force. But the 45 foot gives you a little bit of extra structure. It gives you a little bit of a more solid feel, and it allows your knee to stack properly. So that's why we use a 45 step. So we're going to turn, we're going to step out with our left foot. So we're going to take our right foot, move it 45 degrees. We're going to bring our ankles together here, and we're going to look down at the left foot, just like we do with the front stance, the back stance. We're going to draw a line across the big toe, and we're going to step the foot out and put the heel at the line. Now, we're only taking that one step. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the front foot and we're going to raise the heel, and we're just going to be on the ball of the foot. Making sure that joints are still stacked at this point, so knees haven't fallen out or in on either foot. Weight is still toward the back of our stance, and then we're going to bring our hands to position either at the ribs or up in guarded position, either way. So this is basic structure for your cat stance. Now, big keys for the cat stance. Only 10% of the weight is here, but there is weight on this leg. So a lot of times what we'll see is people will just kind of touch their toe like they're testing water to check its temperature. This is too much weight off of that leg. It hurts the structure of the stance, and it also basically goes against the stance's purpose, right? This stance is supposed to look like this foot is vulnerable, that it's sweepable, that it's attackable. And if it has weight committed to it, it is vulnerable. But in this case, as we only have 10%, I'm supposed to be able to lift this foot without moving my hips. So if I have weight on this foot, when I draw back, or to get this foot up off the ground, I have to transfer the rest of the weight back in order to lift it. So there's a rock of the hips. But if I'm in proper position with this stance, I should just be able to lift it up without my hips moving. So this has to look attackable. So if they go to sweep, I can pick up and attack without having to move the hips and put myself in a worse position. So it's 10% of weight, and it's on the ball of the foot, not the toes. A lot of times we'll see people come up on the toes. Again, you need structure here in order to maintain balance. So if you're up on your toes, you're going to find yourself doing a lot of wobbling because this foot's twitch muscles are going to try to keep you from falling down, and it's not going to get any help from this stabilizing leg. So in order to maintain stability, you need a good stabilizing leg. So 10% of the weight is here. So not a lot of weight, not to where you have to shift your hips forward, but there's enough weight so that it's not just kind of dangling out there, not providing any structure at all. So again, when we look through this stance, joints are still stacked, right? So no knees in outside or inside the body, right over top of the feet, no leaning over top of the toes, so knees are not in front ahead of the toes, and when you're standing here, hips are 45, torso is 45, but your tension's forward. The more you turn in this way, the more torque it puts on this knee, sacrificing the structure of your stance. So that's basically the structure of a cat stance as a whole. Now, when we talk about movement is going to look very similar to the back stance with some minor differences. So when we step forward in a cat stance, we have to watch for this first initial step. So in a back stance, all we said was we're going to move forward, we're going to let the hips glide up with the foot as we turn the hips to bring them all into the right position. We're not going to throw the hips forward, right? Same applies here with one major difference. When we step forward in a cat stance, the first thing we're going to do is drop this weight and turn this foot 45. So I know that looks a little awkward, and you're probably saying, well, why would we do that? Doesn't that put you in a bad spot? You got to remember this is a transit step, right? So this is going to happen quickly, and you can recover from this, because from this position you can move to a lot of different stances. And notice the joints are stacked. So I'm not stepping with this knee out here. That actually hurts my foot. Trying to step this way. I'm stepping with proper joint stacking, so I can maintain balance here and change to a different stance if I need to, if I was attacked in motion. What this avoids is having to do this. So if I wanted to do this stance without turning my foot, I'd have to put weight down, draw my advancing foot through, transfer the weight to my front leg now, turn, and then transfer the weight back. That's a lot of motion, a lot of individual pieces that have to happen to make this stance work, and it could take an extra half a second, which in combat I need that extra half a second. So I don't want to do that. Instead, I'm going to turn this foot. Now this foot's in position. It's already ready to go. And as I move, I'm going to leave the weight here. The weight's still here, and I'm just going to bring my advancing foot up on the ball of my foot. So lower number of movements, faster, and everything's in position as soon as you put it down, which means that you're not overcommitting weight on this front leg, which makes it attackable during your motion, right? Most of the time you're going to get attacked in motion. They're not going to attack you while you're standing still and you're secured in position, right? I shouldn't say every time, but most of the time you're more vulnerable when you're moving, so anybody with some fight experience is going to realize if I attack you in motion, I've got a better chance of getting something done. So we got to watch when we're in motion. So again, from a cat stance, I'm going to turn this foot 45, and it's not 90, right? That would be real hard here. If I did want to turn it 90, what I would have to do is really start putting weight that way and come more to here, which is doable, but again, that's why we like 45 a little bit better. So I'm going to turn 45. I'm going to bring the advancing foot up through, but here my weight's on my back leg. Right now I'm 100% on my back leg. Now I'm going to draw this foot to the right place and give it about 10% of weight. Now I'm stepped into my cat stance. If I want to go backwards, the motion is actually very similar to a back stance with just one major difference. In a back stance, what I would do is I would retreat my leg to center, retreat the leg back, pivot, and set the weight. I'm going to do the same thing with the cat stance, except I'm going to draw this foot back with me into proper position. So as I'm here, I'm going to drop this retreating foot all the way back. I'm going to pivot 45. And now, in order to get to the full cat stance, I have to draw this foot back to its position. Now, the distance that you draw your foot depends on how far back you stepped. This is a little more of a dynamic movement because I can actually step back a little further. So I can step back normal and only draw the foot a little bit, or I can step back pretty far and draw the foot in with me. Because this stance is meant to be more of a transit, it's used a lot when moving from one stance to another in the middle of combat. So for example, if I was in a front stance and I took a heavy hit and I'm stumbling back, this is used to regain balance, regain position, and move back into the fight. Additionally, this stance can be used when you're absorbing impact or absorbing energy from an attack to basically create distance with your opponent and draw them into you. So as I'm coming back here, I'm going to draw them into me and then return. So because this stance is meant as a transit, it's meant to be very dynamic, you can step back at different distances. Now, I recommend when you're training that you keep your distance the same. And the reason I say that is because if I'm going to step back here, and I'm going to draw the foot, and then I step back further and really have to draw this way, I'm going to change my movement pattern, how much my hips move, how much my balance shifts, and it really just changes the structure of the stance in motion. So as you're learning this stance, my suggestion is to stay with the same distance on each stance so that you can do the same motion over and over again to build it into muscle memory. Once it's in muscle memory and you've got the stance down, then you can start playing with dynamic movement. For advanced students at home, this is a really good thing to start working on, because this is what you're going to use in sparring and in your defense in order to try to gain an advantage. So again, one more time, we're moving back and we'll do it from a side view. I'm going to set the front foot back, right? I'm going to set the foot back and drop into it. And as I drop into it and I rotate that foot and I settle it in position, I'm going to draw that front foot back, come up on the balls of the feet, set the weight back on the back leg with 10% on the front, and then put myself in position. So movement in the cat stance front and back is a little more dynamic, and we want to make sure that when we move that we don't cross up, so that when we step, we don't step across our body, right? We want to maintain that same, that gait wide distance, normal gait wide distance here. And we want to make sure that we don't throw the hips, right? So just like we talked about with the back stance, we don't want to turn, toss the hips forward, and then have to push back, right? We want the weight to glide on the same plane, remain at the same plane, so that when you step forward, you don't have to press back to put your hips back into position because they led a little too far. So that's pretty much movement for a cat stance. Now, let's talk about turning. So the turn for cat stance is very similar to the turn for a back stance, again with one major difference. That major difference being the front foot is going to come up as opposed to staying flat on the ground. So if I'm going to turn away from you first to start, I'm going to be setting a cat stance here. The first thing I'm going to do, just like the back stance, is I'm going to turn the foot and transfer the weight at the same time. Now, when I transfer the weight, I want to make sure this is 45, right? So that's another big difference. On the back stance, you turn it 90. On this one, you're going to turn it 45. All the way around, all right? Now, when I set the foot and I set the weight, I'm going to draw this now front foot across the stance. But again, instead of it going all the way out and setting flat, it's coming back and staying on the ball of the foot. So as I come around, it stays up on the ball of the foot. Again, I have to bring it all the way through the stance. So if I'm turning toward you, what I want to avoid, so we'll go through the process here again. I'm going to turn the foot 45. I'm going to start transferring the weight. As I transfer the weight, I'm going to let the hips turn, which is going to drag this foot across the stance, and I'm going to bring it to ball of the foot and put it in position. Now this is pretty good distance here, right? So if I back up the steps, if you want to check yourself, set your foot down, draw the line at your heel, bring your toes to the line, and you should be about together with your heels. So if you find that you're all the way out here and you set and you undo the steps and you've got a foot distance in between you, you're moving that foot a little too far out, more like the back stance would, so you've got to start drawing that in toward the body and coming up on the balls of your feet. So, but what I was getting at previously was, if I turn and I draw this foot up, see how I'm crossed here, right? So I've got to, just like the back stance, I've got to let that foot come all the way across the stance. Not too far, but just all the way across the stance so that it meets that normal gait width, right? Your normal gait, the width of your normal gait, because that's the position that your body's going to be most comfortable with in regards to its structure. So just to recap on cat stance, a little bit of a more difficult stance, a little bit more of a dynamic stance. So this one's going to take a little bit of practice. Again, it's a 90-10, meaning that 90% is on the back leg, 10% of the weight's on the front. When you're in position in a cat stance, joints are still stacked properly. There's not 0% weight on this leg, but not 50, right? It's 10%. So enough that you can pick it up without moving the hips, but not enough weight, but not too much weight where you have to shift backwards into it, or to where you're just touching it with your toe, right? It's ball of the foot, not the toe. 10% of weight here. This leg's not straight, it's bent, right? So there's still bend in this leg, maintaining proper joint stacking. Hands can either be pulled back or up in guarded position. When you're moving, if you're moving forward, you're setting the front foot at 45 as you shift and transfer the weight, keeping the weight at the new back leg, and just setting the foot, ball of the foot at normal gait width. about foot distance in front of you. When you're moving backwards, right, you're setting the foot in its position, transferring the weight as you turn 45, drawing this foot back as much as you need to. Not drawing it all the way back, obviously, is too far. But again, still a foot distance in between your back foot and your front foot. And then when you turn, again, same idea as the back stance, turning that foot to 45, the new 45, shifting the weight, drawing the new front foot across the stance to its proper position. As you turn, coming across, maintaining the little bit of bend in the knee, 10% of the weight on the front foot, ball of the foot being attached to the ground, and maintaining that proper gait width distance in the stance as a whole. So that's cat stance. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Korie with CVMA, and we'll see you again next time.